Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all on this forum and this platform organized by the Morocco's Pavilion in Expo 2020 in collaboration with uh, the Council of Human Rights under the title The Human Rights Through the History and the New Horizons. I would like to also to welcome by our followers on YouTube. That is, they have been following us on our YouTube channel and the Human Rights Council and on the social media. First of all, human rights has witnessed positive development and went through many milestones, whether which qualitative and quantitative. The Moroccan kingdom has enhanced the institutional values and set up strategies and to to emphasize its commitments about the human rights and also to increase the sustainable commitment. Second, to engage in the international platforms of human rights like the institutional empowerment and enhancing democratic values in the country.
وصولا إلى دسترة حقوق الإنسان وتعزيز مبدأ القرب والبعد الجهوي للعمل الحقوقي والنهوض
And also
بالتربية على المواطنة وحقوق
in
الإنسان.
enhancing the human
وعلى المستوى
rights
الدولي صادقت الدولة المغربية على
and
الاتفاقيات الأساسية التسعة المشكلة للنواة الصلبة لحقوق الإنسان وأربعة بروتوكولات ملحقة بها انضمت إليها. وقامت كذلك فيما يتعلق
and about
بحقوق
for the human
المرأة
rights
بسحب
has
المحافظات على
taken off the
حقوقها
reservations about the ninth
وإلغاء
and the
انتهاكات
16
القضاء الدولي
articles about
الفلسطينيين
discrimination against
والمعروفة ضد
women.
المرأة المعروفة بسيداو. جاء
The
دستور
Constitution
2011 بإنشاء الحكومة
2011
لترسيخ المبادئ
as an example
الأساسية
to enhance
وحقوق
human
الإنسان
rights,
المتمثلة في الكونية
the
والمساواة
international
وعدم
and
التمييز
equality
والانتقاد
and,
دون التوجيه
discrimination to
توسيع
enhance
الضمانات
the
الدستورية
institutional
للحقوق
rights for
المدنية
political
والسياسية
and economical and
والثقافية
social rights
والاجتماعية
of women
والثقافية
and
والبيئية
environment as well.
وإلى
In
جانب
addition to
تخصيصه لتخصيصه بابين
in addition to
لحقوق الإنسان
assigning two
والحريات الأساسية
sectors for the
والمؤسسات التي
human
تعمل
rights
في
and the
مجالها.
institutions.
جاء
This
هذا
institution
بإصلاحات
has
جوهرية
come up with a
لتعزيز
very fundamental
النظام
reform
الجديد للسلطة
to
وإدراج مقاربة تشاركية
bring together
متعلقة
the
بحقوق
collaboration
الإنسان
and
والديمقراطية
collaboration
في السياسات العامة
of human
الوطنية
rights
والنهوض
and
بحقوق
also
المرأة
the
والتأكيد
empowerment
على
of
مبدأ
women and
الإنصاف
equality
والمساواة.
value. In
وبصفة
general,
عامة تميز
this
هذا التطور
development
الحقوقي الذي
that
عرفه المغرب
that
خلال
the
هذه
Morocco has
المحطات
witnessed
بالدور الهام الذي لعبته
and
جمعيات
also has been
المجتمع
played
المدني
by
وفاعلين
social
آخرين
institutions,
خصوصا على مستوى
particularly
تناول
in the issues of
المواضيع
the current issues,
والمجتمعية للقضايا المرتبطة بالديمقراطية
issues
وإسس
related to
الفعالية في
democracy
مستوى العالم
and
وخصوصا
government,
ما
and
يتعلق
which also
بقضاء
enhanced
الحريات
and expanded
وإعلاء
the
النظام
freedom
الديمقراطي
and
وتطوير
developed
الترسانة القانونية
the
وتعزيز
institutions
الأسس
and
القضائية.
local
على
institutions. In
المستوى
the
الدولي لا زالت
international
القضايا
arena,
المرتبطة بحقوق
there
المرأة
have been
تمر
issues.
براهنية ملحة
There are
ومتجددة
still remaining some
وأهمها
challenges
تحديات
and new
جديدة
challenges
تلك التي طرحتها
that
أزمة
is
كوفيد
presented
19
by the
الحالية على
pandemic
سبيل المثال
and
والتي أعادت إلى
that brought
الواجهة
together
قضية الهشاشة التي تعاني
the
منها فتاة
fragility and the
كثيرة من
weakness
النساء
of the
في
situation of
الواجهة
women.
عن ما يشكلن
And
أولى
women are
ضحايا
all usually they are
الإجراءات
the
السيئة
first
وفي
victims
نفس
of
الوقت أفرز
in
التطور
violations.
الرقمي والمعلوماتي الذي يسجل
And the
الآن تحديات
digital
وصعوبات
world
معقدة
the digital
ومتفاوتة في
transformation that we are
التحديث
witnessing
بها
also represents
حيث
a challenge to women,
تعاني منصات
where the
التواصل
social
الاجتماعي في بعض الأحيان
social
أداة
platforms
لانتهاك الحق في
have
الخصوصية وهي
stepped in
انتهاكات
onto
مرتبطة
privacy,
بشكل كبير بنشر المعطيات الشخصية
where
الخاصة
personal
دون موافقة
data
أصحابها
has been shared
واستغلالها في بعض
without
الحالات
approval
في
from the owners or
إغراء
the people,
الفتيات أو في سياق الأنشطة
and could be
الإجرامية
also utilized in
والإرهابية.
criminal activities.
وتزداد خطورة هذه
And those
الانتهاكات
violations
عندما يتعلق الأمر
should be
بالنساء.
taken seriously.
على المستوى
And
الوطني
nationally,
ضمن استمرار
with
مسار
regard to
الإصلاحات في
the
المغرب
reform in
بالرغم من
Morocco,
التحديات
despite the
المزدادة
challenges,
يبقى من
it's
الضروري
it's
المزيد
crucial
للزمن في العديد من
to
الورشات
engage in
التي
many
تم
workshops that
إجراؤها
have been
وترصد
launched,
المزيد من
where
التقدم خاصة
many
فيما
workshops
يتعلق
related
بأهمية
to the
استكمال
progress
تنفيذ
that has been
دستور
achieved.
2011 بطريقة تستجيب للالتزامات
in a
الدستورية
way that
والعربية
is also in line with the
وباستكمال
constitution in
قواعد
Morocco.
المساواة والإنصاف كما ينص
And
ذلك الدستور المغربي
the
علاوة
constitution
على
in the
ذلك
Morocco also
يقول الدستور
highlights the importance
هنا
of the
أن التحديات
cha-
المطروحة
of
في
those
مجال
challenges
حقوق المرأة
that women
تتطلب
face,
تعزيز المقاربات المعتمدة وتقوية الجهود
and we need
المشتركة
to work
بين مختلف
together
الجهات
between, we
الفاعلة
need to collaborate
لتعزيز
between all
مشروعية
entities.
الحقوق والحريات بالنظر إلى كونها
And
في
those
ذاتها
challenges
تظل
are also
مرتبطة
related
جزئيا بترسيخ
to
قيم المساواة
the
والإنصاف
values of
والحفاظ على
quality
حقوق
and human
الإنسان مع
rights,
ضمان
and in
تحقيق
sharing
المساواة لجميع الفاعلين
sharing
والفاعلات
all
في المجتمع
players on the stage.
وبهدف مناقشة التقدم المحرز ودراسة التحديات الناشئة
and
وسبل تعزيز الإجراءات
to
والمبادرات المختلفة التي تهدف إلى النهوض بحقوق المرأة وتجديد
and to also
قيم
to
الديناميات
engage on those
الإنسانية
initiatives that
المغربي
are aiming to
ينظم
improve
هذا
the
اللقاء
situation of women
على
in
استعراض
Morocco.
السبل
This
التي من
event has been
شأنها
organized.
على ضمان التنزيل الفعلي والكامل لمبدأ
This event
المساواة
has been organized to
وتحقيق
highlight the
المقاربات
value of
وتعزز
equality
وحضور البعد الجنساني في السياسات
between all
العامة مع
genders,
مراعاة التحديات الاقتصادية والاجتماعية المرتبطة بوضعية المرأة ولإغناء
and to
النقاش
enrich the discussion
حول
about
هذا
this
الموضوع
topic
وملامسة كل
and to touch
الحيثيات
on all its
أرحب
aspects.
هنا
Here
معنا
today
اليوم
we have
السيدة أمينة
Mia
عياش
Ayash,
رئيسة
the head of
المجلس
the
الوطني لحقوق الإنسان
Human Rights Council,
والفائزتين
and
الجمعيتين
Miss and the
والمدافعتين
defenders of the
عن
human
المرأة
women's rights,
السيدة
Miss
أميمة
Umima
عاشور
Ashur
والسيدة
and Miss
مريم
Miriam Uthmani.
عثماني
And
قبل
before we start, and to
وإعطاء
give the
الكلمة
speech
للسيدة
to the head of
المجلس
the
الوطني لحقوق
Human
الإنسان
Rights Council,
لا بأس
I would
أن
like to
نشير إلى
highlight
أن السيدة
that
أمينة
Amina Abu
عياش
Ayash
قد عينت
has been
بقرار
assigned
صاحب
by
السمو
His
الملك
Highness
محمد السادس
Muhammad
من
Sadis
الثامن من
in
ديسمبر
2nd of November
2018
2018
وقد
to
شغلت
and
منذ فبراير
has been
2019
has been working
منصب
as the
صاحب
ambassador of
الرئاسة
His Highness
لدى دولتي
In
السويد
Switzerland and
ولاتفيا
Latvia, and
وتقاعدت
he's been
سابقا
also
بمنصب
working as an ambassador,
الرئيس الفيدرالي
and she also
الأول
worked as the
لرابطة
head of the
حقوق
federal,
الإنسان وبعدها كاتبة
and she is a
الاتحاد
general
العام
writer for the
الفيدرالي في
federal,
نفسها
and she
وهي
is the
أول
first
امرأة
woman in
مغربية
Morocco
ترأس
to head
منظمة حقوقية
a
إنسانية
national
حيث تم المحافظة
organization.
على
She
رأس
has been
المنظمة العالمية
elected
لحقوق
as the head of
الإنسان
the Human
العام
Rights
داش
Parliament for
لولايتين
two
متتاليتين وفي
seats
فترة
in a
سابقة
row,
كانت
and
السيدة أبو عياش
she
عضوة
has been
مؤسسة
assigned also
التواصل في
to
ديوان الوزير
communicate
الأول السابق
on
السيد عبد
the
الرحمن
Royal
الشافعي
Council,
كما
and
عملت
she also
هي
worked as a
وحديثة في
journalist
مجال
in
التواصل
institutional
والاشتباك
communication,
تم
and she has
اختيار
been also
السيدة أبو
elected
عياش المتخرجة في مجال العلوم
in the
الاقتصادية عضو
economical
التركيبة
science
الاستشارية
to
لمراجعة
review
الدستور
the
المغربي
institution,
بأدلة
the
الولاة
Moroccan
كما
institution,
حظيت
and she has
برؤية العديد
also
من الهيئات
worked in
والمنظمات
many
على صعيدين
organizations, regionally
التنظيم
and
الدولي من
internationally,
بينها
among
مجلس
of
القانون
which
الإنساني الدولي
the
ومؤسسة
Middle
الأوسط
East
والجمعية
Forum
الأفريقية
for
للتصديق على البروتوكول
accreditations
الاختياري
of the
لاتفاقية الأمم المتحدة
UN
لمناهضة التعديل وغيره من طرق
accreditations,
المعاملة أو العقوبة القاسية أو
and also
الاعتدائية أو المهينة
the
وهو ما استمر
inhumane
بين أهداف
punishments,
التصديق على البروتوكول الاختياري لاتفاقية مناهضة التعديل
and
وتشجيع
and
إنشاء
encourage
آلية
coming
للوقاية
up with the
النسائية
mechanisms to
MLK
prevent to
والإبلاغ إلى
avoid
منظمة
punishments or
الأمم
torture.
لإصلاح جامعة الدول العربية
And
ومجموعة
um,
العمل التابعة للشبكة الأورو متوسطية لحقوق الإنسان حول حرية تكوين
and
الجمعيات
she has
ومؤسس
played many
منظمة
roles, many activities. Mona Aisha, she
مؤسس
is a
ومساهم
contributor
في
to
تأسيس
find many
العديد من المنظمات غير
organizations,
الحكومية
non-organization
وقد
companies.
تولت
And Miss Abu
السيدة
Aisha,
عياش منصب
she
نائبة أمين عام
also
لجنة
worked
الإشراف
as the
المكلفة
head of a
بإعداد خطة
committee
العمل الوطنية في مجال
for to
الديمقراطية
operate in
وحقوق
the
الإنسان
national
بين
the democracy and
2008
human
و
rights,
2010 وتفعيل توصيات هيئة الإنصاف
and also
والمصالحة
to activate
من
the
ناحية الإنسانية.
recommendations
شاركت السيدة أبو عياش
of the
في حملة
reconciliation.
الترافع
And she
السياسي في
also
العاصمة
she played a
أديس
part
أبابا
in an event in
لتسهيل
Addis
إعادة
Ababa
إطلاق اعتماد البروتوكول على
for
التعرف
African
بالتحرر
Union
والإعدام
to eliminate
بالإضافة إلى
the punishment,
مشاركتها
the
في
death
الترافع
punishment,
للتصديق على اتفاقية مناهضة الاختفاء
and
القسري
also
عبر
the
قيامها بالتنسيق في إطار
she
تنفيذ
also she has
سياسات
been
هيئة
played
الإنصاف
many
والمصالحة
active and very
وغير
vital roles
المنظمات
in many different
الحكومية
arena and
في
many
مجال
different
حقوق الإنسان من
platforms.
أجل الحملة الهادفة إلى التصديق على اتفاقية مناهضة الاختفاء القسري.
And she has
رشحها
been nominated
الريالة
by His
الملك
Highness
محمد
Muhammad
السادس
السادس
لوسام العرش من الدرجة
to
الأولى
the
للتضابط ووسام العرش
10th
من درجة فارس
Medal
تقديرا
Award.
لإسهاماتها كعضوة في اللجنة الاستشارية لمراجعة
And she
الدستور.
also played
كما
a vital role in
سنناقش
reviewing the
موضوع
Moroccan institutions.
تم
And
مؤخرا،
she has been also
وهو
elected
اختيار السيدة أمينة بوعياش
among
لخلف
5 women
النساء المثليات.
leaders
كرسنا
that
حياتها
have
من
worked
النضال من أجل عالم تترسخ فيه المساواة بين الجنسين، مزدادة بمدينة تطوان في 10 من دجنبر تاريخ الإعلان العالمي
for human
لحقوق الإنسان.
rights.
إذا هل
Is
هي
it a
صدفة؟
coincidence?
الكلمة لكم سيدة الرئيسة لتقديم
The
عرض
floor is
للمؤتمر
yours.
التاريخي لحقوق المرأة بالمغرب.
طيب. شكرا. شكرا
Thanks,
السيدة الرئيسة
Miss
أولا على
Moderator. I
تفصيل
have like to
وجه
highlight something
لعيش
annoys me
الأحيان عمومي في
in
المجتمع
general.
المدني.
First of all, I would like
أولا
to
شكرا
thank to
للحضور
those
الكريم،
who are attending this event
ونقول
and the
تفاعل مع
introduction
قضايا
about our
مسرعة
path
دوليا
as women,
كنساء، ولكن بالأساس
and also
وكأم.
internationally and
أولا
nationally.
لابد
We
من
would like
التطور
to
بأنه
say
نحن
today
اليوم
we
في
are
رواق
in
المرأة،
the Women's
بمثل
Pavilion.
هذه فضاء
It's an
شبيك
distinguished
حول
space,
موضوع
and we
أكثر
have
تميزا
addressing a very interesting
يثير
topic
دائما
that
التساؤل
raises many questions,
ويتطلب
and we need
منا
to
الجهود
exert
بشكل
efforts
متواصل
continuously
كي
to be
نتمكن
able
فعلا من
to
أن
present
نقدم أولا
ourselves
أنفسنا،
and
ولكن
also
كذلك
to
أن
present
نقدم ترافعنا
our
وأن
ideas,
نقدم
our reasons,
أسبابنا
our
وأن
cause,
نقدم
our thoughts
الأفكار لتجاوز
to overcome the
المعيقات
challenges,
نقول الاجتماعية بالأساس
the
والفقط.
overcome the social and
الحل
the
موضوع
cultural challenges. About women,
النساء وموضوع
as you
يتطلب
know,
الارتياء
this
من
issue
الجهود
requires some
التفكيري
creative,
والإبداع
creative thinking
العام
and creativity
وعلى
and innovation.
المتواصل. بطبيعة الحال هو
And
كذلك
also,
موضوع يدخل
it's
ضمن
part of
أولويات
our
مجلس
priorities
الإنسان
for the
حقوق
Human
الإنسان،
Rights Council, which
مؤسسة
we are a
دولية
constitutional and
وطنية
institutional
مستقلة،
institute.
وهي
We are
المؤسسة
also
التي
an
شرف لي
institute
طبعا
that,
تفضلت بذلك
as the
رئيس
moderator
الجمهورية،
highlighted, I have the
شرف لي
honor
خلال
by
ذلك
His Highness the King
في
of Morocco
جانفي
in
2018
2018
بتأسيسها.
to assign,
وبالنسبة
I've been
لي
assigned to
أنا
lead
إذا
this
رأيته
organization in a
برسالة بليغة
message
الفحوى
from
الجائزة
His
للعمل
Highness the King
توافق سياقا
that this
مغربيا
institution should work in
يقتضي
line with
ويسير
the
قدما
culture of
على مسار
Morocco
المساواة
to be
في مسؤولية
equal
وفي
and
مراكز
all be
القرار
to play
بين
a
الرجال
decision maker
والنساء
equally,
بالمغرب.
men and women.
لا
We
بد
need to
أن أؤكد
emphasize
على سروري
that I'm
بتواجدي
happy to
اليوم
be here
في
today in
هذا
this
اللقاء،
platform
وأن نتقاسم
and to share
تجارب
with you our
وتأملات
reflections
في
and
انشغالات
experiences
حقوقية عابرة
that
الحدود
across the border and the
ومقرة في
continents,
جوهرها وذات
and
خصوصيات إقليمية
and those
محلية
concerns
في
those
تجلياتها.
concerns also we
كرامة
can share.
الإنسان والمساواة بين الجنسين تمر اليوم
Equality
أكثر
between men
من أي
and
وقت
women
مضى عبر
go through
حضارات
different
ثقافية،
channels.
وهي التجليات التي تؤصل لكرامة النساء عبر مختلف
This will
الخصوصيات
render deeply
الإقليمية.
rooted rights for women
انطلاقا
locally
من
and
هذا نحظى بنا بالمجلس الوطني
mention
لحقوق
that the
الإنسان
Human Rights
وبشراكة مع
National Council,
جناح
in
المغرب في
cooperation with the
إكسبو دبي
Dubai Expo
2020
Moroccan wing,
بتنظيم هذه
organized this
الفعالية. وأود
activity,
في
and therefore
البداية
I would
أن
like to
أهنئ
take this
فعلا
opportunity
المسؤولين
to really
على تنظيم
congratulate
الاستثناء
this
الجيد لهذا
outstanding
الحفل والذي
organization
يشهد
during
مصداق
this
نجاحاته
action
كلها.
and function. Thank you.
نلتئم إذن
Today we
اليوم
meet
بالمعرض
at
العالمي
this
للشباب
international
وفعالياته
expo with
الرائعة في
its
المغرب.
ceremonial existence
تتبعنا
that we
من
have been
خلال مشاهدة
following
فيديوهات
through the
حول
videos
ميدانيا
or in
وتنوع
real life,
المشاركين
and not
فيه
to mention the
أشخاصا
diversity
من
of the
دول
visitors on the
بثقافات
level of
وانتماءات
individuals and
مختلفة.
countries with
حدث
different
لنا
cultures
للملامح
with
متميزة
outstanding
حين
features.
نحضر
It is
معرضا
the first
من هذا
exhibition
النوع
of its kind
يخصص
that
مساحة
is
حصريا
focusing
لقضايا النساء،
exclusively
والذي
wings for
سيمكن
women issues
الحالة
that will
من تسلية الأطراف.
undoubtedly
ونحن
shed
في هذه
light on
الجلسة
women's
نتكلم
issue within this
على قضايا
international
النساء
atmosphere, so
المعيقات.
that we focus on
كذلك
women's
آمالنا
issues and obstacles
وطموحاتنا في المساواة
alongside our
والاستقلال
ambitions towards
فقط بين
equity and
الجنسين،
equality
وتمكين
between genders
اقتصادي
based
وبناء
on
المرأة
socio-economic
وغيرها من
empowerment and
قضايا
other such
الحقوق
rights
الرأسية.
related priorities. Before venturing into the context of these rights in my country, I wanted to cross with you some stations that are indicative and symbolic through the struggle in history across the world. That is why I will try in a brief to denote the path of women's struggle and perseverance in defending ideas that at that time were against the currents of the communities and the cultures and that were against women's rights, rendering the Moroccan path as part of the national path. Sometimes meeting struggles against any discrimination pertaining to women's rights. 2 decades since the crystallization of the terminology of women's right. 2 decades have crystallized the women's right as a structured and structuring terminology. When we talk about structured, it means women merit the decency of living. But when it's structured, it means that when it is structuring, it means that it is lighting the way for others. Undoubtedly, the story of women's struggle on the international arena deriving at full rights is still going on. Not to mention that perhaps this is the longest time interval to anchor a group of rights. Not to mention that women can barely remove all the obstacles when it comes to equality between gender, not to mention harder struggles. In order to fight for civil rights since 1988 with the intention of elevating status of women, guaranteeing health and education up until legal rights demands and the cultural rights, environmental rights, and fighting against all forms of discrimination. And here I would like to say that being here in this path is undoubtedly for women to reach there. They had to work through political, educational, cultural, economical, and social arenas to demand their rights on the international level, particularly since the beginning of the 19th and the 20th century, not to mention between the first and second words when it comes to the United Nations stipulating the principles of equality between man and women. We were disappointed, sadly, at that time, but nonetheless, hope is still there as we persevere by elevating the matter, reaching San Francisco 1945, denoting the sex of people in its clear stipulation. And this was considered at that time that incorporating the convention to terminologies pertaining to women and sex-based discrimination or gender-based discrimination clarifies the ambiguity in that area. When they spoke about rights, it was as if they were only talking about the rights of men, and that was the start of the road. In order to fight against discrimination, gender-based discrimination, hence reaching the Universal Declaration for Human Rights that started to accumulate gains for women. And the rally started deriving at a lot of conventions like CEDAW 1970s, after which the Peking Declaration 2000 2005 that put forth an international plan to work on women's rights and equality. Thereafter, the arena has expanded pertaining to women's rights despite diversification up until gender issues is a measure to the openness and development of communities and countries. Where was Morocco in all of this? All of those international but rather universal changes. It was so hard for me to find what to talk about in minutes because we only have minutes. But please allow me as we celebrate the independence of Morocco to present to you firstly a historical narration of women's path as an actual rich and inspiring march with all elements of its experiences combining past, present and future that come together with memories, events and active ingredients between the nation and the international arena, rendering a reality of rights that is pushing the community towards a proximity on the cultural level towards equality between genders. Secondly, I would like to remind about the pioneering women who left their footprints in the historical momentums that are correlated to the international developments. And thirdly, I would like to stand by your side contemplating an assessment of women's status alongside all the achievements and the challenges, particularly when it comes to the 21st century. Perhaps some followers may find the historical path of the Moroccan women is that of a rights dimension. But to be honest with you, that's not the sole path. It is a multifaceted path that is not restricted to one framework. It is personal, individual, group that are interlaced to incorporate within community path that is drawn by the Moroccan woman with her struggle and perseverance in all sectors and fields to elevate her status. She was active, still is active when it comes to a community development that of ideology that is upgraded with all the socio-economic, cultural, political changes our country is living through. Who among us doesn't remember Fatima al-Fihriya, who has established the most ancient Al-Qarawiyyin University in Nafas in the last century? This Qarawiyya University was renovated and restructured as a historical standing position. Who doesn't pride him or herself with the participation of hundreds of women in the foundation forum of Akhawat Safa forum that resisted the colonization ahead of their time? Who doesn't remember the signing of the women on the Independence Declaration that was alongside this University for Women in Fas? Who doesn't remember Surya Shinawi? She was the first pilot on an airplane in the Arabic and Islamic world. In 1951, she was a mere 16 years of age at that time. Who doesn't remember Fatima al-Mernisi, the author, writer, and literate scholar that focused on women and so many other active women that participating in order for the Moroccan women will have a status in their community. To them all our greetings and appreciation on this very good Independence Day of Morocco. When it comes to women's rights, ladies and gentlemen, in Morocco has been through so many developments and dynamics within international context, some of which we mentioned, that are still recording differences in practices, rendering discussions within the kingdom amongst the communities, politicians, and other scholars that are interlacing with the development. Not to mention, there are still some challenges related to women's rights, even though we started the path a long time ago. Undoubtedly, I have to reiterate that women's movement in Morocco, most of the establishments of that movement were active politicians or active members of the democratic parties. But we decided the beginning of the 80s to detach this struggle and political action so that there was a qualitative jump focusing on the so that those associations were more focusing on women's rights, and that is why women's rights became a national issue that are related to the politics and reform demands, whether political or legal, rendering 1993 endorsement on the CEDAW agreement, not to mention the first review of the personal status code at that time that was initially done in 1957. All this movement and dynamics pertaining to women's rights went through accelerating development since 1993, so that they became faster, more accelerating. And let me say, we're talking about less than 20 years. There were so many strong changes when it came to women's rights. For example, personal status, and for the first time in the history of Morocco, there was what we call the plan to merge women in development with all of its cultural, economic, social, political, and legal dimensions. This at that time raised so many community and sharp discussions, some were with, some were against. But nonetheless, the project, in my own personal perception, made it a national issue that is discussed by those who are mature, as the politicians and the thinkers and the legal people joined. His Majesty's initiative to create a commission made of men and women to focus on crystallizing the code of the family, with its sovereignty and creative context in order to open public dialogue. At that time, the family code was presented to the Parliament in 2003 during the opening of the legislative authority at that time. Perhaps many consider that this was an easy task, but undoubtedly we have to reiterate, and here I consider that endorsing such a family code at the Parliament at that time, meaning that we have given this law its legislative characteristic, hence it was incorporated within the constitutional measure to be approved. Before that, sadly, the personal status law didn't have this kind of elevation to the level of the constitution. This constitutional dimension gave more focus on the importance of women's right to be anchored in laws that are discussed openly and amended by the representatives of the people at the Moroccan parliament. At the same time, we witnessed another amendment pertaining to the nationality law that equated rights when it comes to the Moroccan nationality given to a child regardless of the place of birth from one of foreign parents. Thereafter, we spoke about the equity. And we started to look at the women's participation based on the quota.
As per the article number 19, which is called here in Morocco the national law of the women, and setting up a fund to encourage the political representation of women. This step with regard to the political representation of women has witnessed accelerating development, whether that in that led to the latest election in 2021 with enormous representation of political women in women, and also electing 3 women as a mayor for for 3 main cities in Morocco. In addition to many women taking shouldering the responsibility of the municipalities, including also including villages, towns, and societies in different parts of the kingdom. But I have to highlight, for me as an active in the human rights, that the most important assurance of the equality between both genders is to constitutional agreement that has highlighted by the representative, by the organizer of this event. This constitutional agreement highlights the commitment by the Moroccan people to the constitution and to work hand in hand with both genders. And also the constitution highlights fighting all types of discrimination, whether based on color or gender or religion or culture or social status or language or disability, or you name it. And that men and women are equal with regard to rights and responsibilities and social freedoms and political and social rights, and as well as cultural and environmental rights as per the constitution of the Moroccan Kingdom of Morocco. And also there is a section that highlights the working on setting up a new entity that fights all types of discriminations, and that entity that has been approved by the parliament, and we are looking forward to see it in action, to see this entity in reality. But in my point of view, and in this discussion about equality between both genders, those elements, the legal elements, have become a reference to formulate legislative framework, and also has become a reference to restrict the disputes about human rights between all actors, on whether they are legislatives, lawyers, and politicians. Those elements, constitutional elements, they are represent the foundations and the reference for the legislative, and they are also foundation for laws. For example, to enhancing the rights of ownership. The woman has the right
من
to
الآراء
own a
الجماعية
piece of
من
land
حيث
and
المساواة
become
بين
equal
المرأة والرجل
as
في
men
الحقوق
with regard to
والواجبات.
responsibilities and rights.
وهناك
And there is
كذلك
also,
انطلاقا من هذه
based on those
المعطيات،
elements,
وهذه نقول
some
استثناءات
exemptions of
المنح. أصبح للنساء
laws.
منذ يوليوز
There are
2018
some exemptions
الحق في
that
الوصول إلى مهنة
sorry,
إلى مهنة
women
العدول.
can also work as عدول.
هذا
This is the
الدستور
constitution.
العدول.
The
أصبح
woman
للنساء منذ يوليوز
from
2018
2018
الحق في
has the
الولوج
right
إلى
to
مهنة
become
العدول،
عدول,
والتي
which is a
كانت إلى
job
عهد
that
قريب
restricted
حكرا
by
على
to men.
الرجال.
And
وهو كما قلت
as I said
سبق
earlier,
بالعالم
in the
العربي
world, the Arabic
والإسلامي
world,
حسب
as per
المعطيات
the
المعلنة
circumstances,
هناك حوالي 300
300
امرأة
women work
تعمل في أو تزاول
work
مهنة
this job, which is
العدول
عدول
في
in
المغرب.
Morocco.
بطبيعة الحال
There
هناك
are
قوانين ذات
laws
أهمية
that's very
بالنسبة
important
لنا
as
كقانون
human
حماية
rights
العاملات
to protect the
المنزليات سنة
maids.
2016، كذلك
Also,
دخول حيز النفاذ سنة
those laws
2018
have been
للقانون
applied
المتعلق
with
بمكافحة
regard
العنف
to
ضد
laws
النساء
that
حيث
fighting
التنفيذ في
the
شهر
violence against
2016
women.
اللي
That
حدد
law
بالنسبة لنا أهم
assigned with
الأشياء هو
specific the
المفهوم
concept of
بالعنف
violence against women,
بكل
all types of
أشكاله،
violence, and
وتطرق
also
كذلك
highlighted and
للتحرش والعنف ضد النساء في
specifically
الأماكن
talked about the
العمومية
violence against women,
والخصوصية،
and
وحدد
also
كيفية
how
التكافل
can we
للنساء
protect
ضحايا العنف.
women who
وهذا
are the
عمل
victims
ما زال
of
متواصل
violence.
من طرف
And
المؤسسات
also
ومن طرف
from a
المجتمع المدني.
constitutional institution point of view and social point of
إذا
view.
كنت
Ladies and
سيداتي
gentlemen,
السادة
if
قد
I
قدمت بعض
highlighted
الجوانب
in my speech some elements related
الخاصة
to
بحقوق المرأة،
women's rights,
فإن
but
اليوم بالمملكة
today in
المغربية
the Moroccan
وضمن
kingdom
الاجتهادات
and also
الدولية التي ربطت ما بين
as
الحق في
per
التنمية
the
وحقوق
rights
الإنسان
of human
واعتبار
rights
حقوق
as the
الإنسان
approval of
كمبادئ
human
دولية
rights as a
إنسانية
foundation for
نعمل
development,
على
we
بناء
work
سياسات
on setting up
إنسانية
policies
مناهضة
that
للتمييز،
fight
والتي
discriminations.
لا
And
تكتفي
those policies
بإصلاح
will not only
القوانين،
reform
بل
laws,
كذلك
but also
استهداف
target
الأسباب
the
العميقة
deep
للتمييز
foundations
في
of
مختلف
discriminations in all
أبعادها
its elements, all its
الاقتصادية
dimensionals,
والاجتماعية
political and cultural
والثقافية
dimensions.
والدينية. أعتبر
I
بأن
consider
كل تقييم
that
أو مقاربة
any
بموضوع
comparison
المساواة
between
والعمل على تحقيق
equality
المنظمة
is,
تحتاج كما وقلتها
as
سابقا
I
في
said
المجلس العالمي
earlier,
لحقوق
in human
الإنسان
rights,
إلى
to
بناء
achieve
ثقافة
equality, we need to
مجتمعية
raise awareness
داعمة
and build a
وحاضنة
culture that
للمشاركة
embraces the
النسائية.
rights of women
أثناء
and
الحضور
equality
الرسمي
and build the
مما يؤهل
capacities
رصدا
to
موضوعيا
become objective
ودقيقا
with regard to
للكيانات
challenges related to
المسجلة
the
على مستوى الولوج
with the
الحقوقي
rights
وتكثيف
and
الجهود
working hand in hand
لتحقيق
to change
المعطيات
the
الاجتماعية
situation and improve it.
والثقافية.
I
أعتبر بأن
consider
في
that in
المغرب
Morocco,
مسار
the
المساواة بين
path
المرأة
forward for
والرجل
equality between both
الذي انطلق
genders has
وطنيا
been launched
وامتزج
and
بما هو
is
كوني
universal, will
سيتواصل من
continue
أجل
to change
تغيير
the mindset.
التقنيات،
And
وهذه
this is a
التغييرات
priority for
الجوهرية
us.
التي
And this
تتكون
priority
على
is
معتقدات
based on
باعتبارها
ideas,
أفكار تجانب
thoughts
الحق والعدل في
to
تعريف
identify
الإنسان
and identify
وحق حماية
human
العاملات.
and human dignities.
إنني على
I'm quite
يقين
confident that
أننا
women of
نساء
Morocco,
المغرب
with
بمثابرتنا
working diligently and
لأهدافنا
hard,
وتطلعاتنا
and our
وأحلام
reliance on
ومخططات
working together
تشاركنا
hand in hand, we will
سنجدد
renew our
مسارات
path of
حياتنا
life and we will
بكسر
overcome
المعتقدات
those
التي تؤسس
mindsets,
لدنيتنا
and
وتهميشنا بأننا
we won't be
نضع نصب
marginalized,
أعيننا
and we will
مجتمعا
work in a very
متماسكا عصريا
coherent society
يضمن
that
كرامة
ensures our dignity
النساء
as women
ويضمن
and ensures
كرامة
the
فتيات
dignity of girls
المملكة
of
المغربية.
Morocco. Thank you
شكرا على
very much.
متابعتكم.
Thanks, Ms. President, of this historical narrative that you've shared with us, that included many milestones that have been achieved in human rights or in women's rights in Morocco. Then, with regard to your presentation, the head of the Human Rights Council, with regard to the women's rights, Dr. Umayma Ashur, is a lawyer and also an active for human rights and in the law of Muhammad Al-Khamis University, and holds PhD in law from the university. she holds, Ms. Ashur, she holds many, many various positions, and she has many achievements. She was, she also had the international platform for young people in the Middle East and North Africa, and and she also advocated for the women's rights and social justice. She is an active also in the international arena where she was elected as a vice president of the African Women's Council in 2015 in its fifth edition. She, Ms. Amima Ashur, she wrote a few books about the situation in Morocco and about the women's rights in Morocco, and she also wrote many scientific articles, and she has the thesis, her PhD thesis won many awards internationally. She is the head of the Jusur or bridge, and she works as a consultant to the UN, and she advocates and fights for equality and empowering women. She she works hand in hand with many actives and many players in many campaigns to to cause positive change in universities and schools or in society. Ms. Umayma Ashur, you are welcome. Could you please tell us about the most important legal reforms that has been achieved in Morocco to empower women? Thank you, Ms. President, and thanks for hosting me, and thanks for inviting me. Morocco in Expo Dubai, I'm quite happy to be here, and I'm quite proud to be part of this meeting. Thank you for the organizers of this event, and thanks for organizing this amazing event that reflects the improvement in Morocco and reflects the improvement of the women's status in Morocco. And certainly, there are many points that led to the improvement of the situation in women's rights. The head of the Human Rights Council highlighted the long journey for women's rights, and Malika Al-Faisi that write the independence decree. And today we are living in a very exceptional day for Morocco's women. The beginning of the last century, women played a very crucial role and we were present everywhere, particularly for the women's movements, for the and women's political movements. And there are many parties that they believe in the value of equality. And today the discussion is social discussion.
This was always in the hearts and mind. It really gave forth men and women and fought for this case. There were so many discussions, and today we have a community dialogue to elevate women's rights. Not to mention, we have a present strong civil community with novelty and ideas that represent Morocco's reality. Perhaps this dynamics, I can say, given we are in 2021, 11 years from the Constitution, 10 years that anchors the terminologies of equality, equity, and state of law. This gave constitutional authorities to talk about freedoms and rights continuously in cooperation with the local communities. This is a participatory democracy today in Morocco, where the civil society is working alongside this track in order to change a particular law or perhaps work on a particular code. Here I can talk about the alliance I belong to, or the forum I belong to, which is 70, which is composed of 70 memberships in terms of organizations and parties and individuals who really believe in the activating equality and equality Article 16 of the Constitution. Not to mention, the movement today feels Morocco is going through transformation, socio-economical in nature, emitting out of belief in equity and equality alongside CSOs and ministries, which are the custodians and the community and the parties. And together we were able to create community dialogue on equity in Morocco. We lived through the elections and the months of elections. Not to mention, there had been amendments before the elections pertaining to election laws. There were amendments that empowered women's political participation and political lists, national women lists. Not to mention, as Her Excellency the President or the Chairman of this session said, all the results were positive. Now we have young women across the kingdom, inclusive urban and rural areas, that really believe in the importance of nomination. Actually, they nominate, they went ahead and won and represented the others, and this is a win we are proud of. Not to mention elevating political participation, rendering women in decision-making positions in Morocco, Casablanca, in Marrakesh and Casablanca, not to mention senior ministerial positions such as the Ministry of Finance, artificial intelligence, housing, digital transformation. Those examples are real life examples of legal transformation for sure, given the support of the legal. Not to mention, the community itself is developing and evolving with a strong women presence up until especially that women are taking senior positions across the kingdom and in the world. There are so many legal transformations that open the door, enabling women to participate, giving them ample opportunities in decision-making positions. They were able to excel and prove their merits in managing public order. Hence again, those laws that were mentioned, not wanting to be boring, I'm not going to recount them, but perhaps I can say that this has started in 24 under the prudent rule of His Majesty, not to mention from the Parliament as well, rendering the Code of Women, which we are about to amend in order to be abreast with transformation, covering women in in decision making, alongside other transformation worked upon by the civil society, supported by the legal department and criminal codes covering women. Now women are there, are present in important positions, but the laws have to catch up in order for women to practice their duties appropriately. There is also the 1313 violence law, which created a new dynamics in order to break the wall of silence on violence in Morocco. Today, women are able to defend their rights. But there needs to be a law, not to mention there are coordinating public units working on violence phenomena and others supporting the fight for victims of violence. There is a unanimous civil action and responsiveness by national agents to create a dynamics that guarantees protection and elevation of human rights within community dignity. For sure, there are so many challenges and community obstacles pertaining to the male dominancy culture, but nonetheless, we are able to say that this legal and rights dynamics for both men and women in those instances is very important. They enabled Morocco to cover wide strides in elevating women's rights. Not to mention, today we are looking at inheritance equality. This is a very important topic. We are now acknowledging women's right in inheritance. His Majesty was leading this initiative, but today women with rights in inheritance are asking for their rights in areas that had been predominantly dominated by men. Today, there are so many open doors in order to work on equity. Our forum was able to present a petition, first of its kind in 10 years, to be accepted by the parliament. Not to mention, there had been a deep desire to also suggest an equity legal framework that may very well become a binding legal status that will enable women get their equity rights. This law will this was adopted recently, and it enables women ask for their equity within the corporation's law, the company's law. This is a new law, and it's again responding to the demands. Today, Morocco, during COVID-19, we are looking at artificial intelligence, and we're talking about digitization that is giving a leeway to new advancements covering socio-economic and political aspects. Today, acknowledging equity means it is responding to legal rights, and it's a good legal leeway to work upon by all community components, parties, CSOs, CBOs, consultative councils, etc. This is a group work. It's a very important group work. Perhaps there's another discussion amidst communities on reproductive rights that are standing in the way of the political and socio-economic empowerment of women, given that we are trying to empower women in terms of reproductive rights, so that it is legally supporting women, and we are able to change the family code and the criminal law in order to allow women work with leniency and convenience, hence able to reach their aspired goals. Perhaps I can stop short at this point. Perhaps I can leave the chance to others. Thank you so much, Ms. Umayma Ashur. Now we have to acknowledge
enregistrées dans notre pays en matière d'égalité et de parité sont réelles et tangibles.
the progress that allow us to be optimistic for the future. We have assets that are considered as given. We should not lose sight that we need to continue in our commitment, and we should keep in mind that we still have a long way to go. To this effect, we are pleased to have with us Mrs. Miriam Arutmani with us. Mrs. Arutmani is president of the National Institution of Solidarity for Women in Distress. She is also president of a company decided to get involved in private sector, and she is a real pioneer in activist work. So she has also experience in the foundation in South and worked with different other activists in Commission of Education for the Young Girl. It's an association that was established in 1996, and INSAF Foundation aims to achieve equality in a society that will allow each child and each girl to grow up in a place that will allow them a safe life in Morocco. So she also wants to contribute to the situation, the improvement of the situation of women and children in Morocco throughout the prevention and protection and the consolidation of their lives, and also the reintegration of mothers. And also she is involved in the lives and defending lives of children and women against different types of violence. And she received the French Medal of Honor. Mrs. Othmani, based on your long experience in the advocacy of women and children, what do you think about the judicial situation in Morocco regarding women and children? Thank you for giving me the floor. I admit that I am very pleased because the presentation that were given were very comprehensive and brilliant. So I will try to summarize quickly. So many researchers believe that the reform of the family code called Mudawana, reviewed in 2004, is the ideal situation based on Islamic law, and it implements social justice and equality between genders. This new code is based on responsibility shared between both sexes, but also the laws between them. There is also equality between spouses in their household. So also there is equality in different aspects. The woman can ask for divorce, but before divorce was only possible by the man. Divorce can also be done through agreement. And the age for marriage has been fixed, and a girl who is adult doesn't need a guardian for marriage. So for the girl, she can have the ability to decide. The child out of wedlock has the right to be recognized by his parents. Since 2006, the Moroccan woman has the right to give her citizenship to her child. A Moroccan woman married overseas can have the right to get the citizenship. Moroccans benefit of the same rights like men. The disease, the health insurance also has been provided to women, and to find the open out of school for girls 4 million school bags are distributed every year. 2,200 school girls receive subsidies. Widow women can also get subsidies. And the law against social exclusion allow protection against different situation in life in terms of health subsidies. So this was a very short summary compared to your extensive report. Thank you, Madame Otmani.
أعود إليك أخت أم معشور للسؤال عن المجهودات المبذولة لتعزيز حقوق
Now, we'd like
النساء
to ask about the efforts have been exerted by women in Morocco, and what is the civil social role in face of the challenges that women are facing. Thank you very much. Indeed, the women in Morocco have went through a very difficult time during the pandemic. This is worldwide. Women all around the world went through a very difficult time. But women in Morocco experienced the same thing that experienced by other women. There have been personal efforts by the Moroccan women to deal with the pandemic, whether it's a duty as at home, the collective responsibility, local and many responsibilities, and to work and to maintain the work in a way that's equally men and women. Women were on the first row, with their first line, health, safety, security. Morocco's women, they are very patriotic. If you allow me, they are very patriotic, and we should respect them and appreciate whatever they did for their countries and for their families and for their society during that exceptional circumstances during the pandemic. They also offer sacrifices, enormous sacrifices. Now, I would like to highlight the civil society that I represent. Women in the civil society were there day and night, especially those women who work and they advocate against violence against women, and they worked hard on national to create in the Ministry of Justice and ministry to create electronic platforms to receive complaints. We lived in a very difficult circumstances, and there were a platform called Kulina Ma'ak for women's for women's so that platform used to communicate, sorry, the general public prosecutor, and the royal guards. That platform would communicate with all those entities. So there have been violence, there are victims for the violence, and there have been great work exerted by women on those societies, on those associations, and they worked collectively to face the challenges that during the pandemic. And there have been many, they worked together collectively, and there was like collective intelligence. Women worked together in corporations. Yesterday, we presented the Heliduco to create platforms, electronic platforms to buy and sell and promote and market items during the pandemic. And another initiative was launched to ensure the continuous work of women. There are many institutions that presented by associations and by corporations in a very innovative way for the collective intelligence for the Morocco in that circumstance. Certainly, during the pandemic,
ظهرت مأسسة دور المجتمع
the
المدني
civil
في
society
هذه الأزمة
has
وظهر
played very
التضامن
important
الجماعي
role in
وظهر
that
أيضا
circumstance,
التضامن
and we could choose
الوطني
the
من
collaboration
خلال على المستوى الجهوي على مستوى
and
الحي على مستوى بعض بعض المجالات
in
اللي
some
المجتمع المدني
fields of
ينحدر فيها بكل
civil
بالتضامن
society
مع المؤسسات
worked in
الأمنية
collaboration with securities,
الجماعية
with different entities.
وكانت هناك
There were
قائدة
like leaders,
قائدة
women
حرية
leaders,
القائدة حرية ونساء
and
ونساء
other women
قيادات
played
لا
very,
يمكن أن
like,
تفهم
they
الإنسان
enjoyed the
كيف
leadership
كانت هناك
spirit,
قائدات
but they were
حريصات
there
على الأحياء في مستوى
in
الأحياء
neighborhoods
ولضمن
and to
الأمان
ensure safety and
والأمن
security.
للنساء أكيد عاشت
Obviously, women
النساء تطور
witnessed
ودينامية
development and dynamic
في
in a
ظرف
very
6
short
سنين
period of
في
time,
ظرف
in
6
a
سنة
year, in
ونصف
1 year and a half
ونتكلم على مرور
for the
7 سنين
pandemic,
وكانت
and there have
هناك
been
أجوبة
very
صريحة
clear answers
لكوفيد
for
بينها
COVID
ورش توسيع الحماية
for social
الاجتماعية
protection
الذي
that led
يقوده صاحب
by His
الجلالة
Highness and
الملك محمد السادس
Muhammad
نصره الله
VI,
وهذا الورش
the,
كان
and
جواب لأزمة كوفيد
and that
19
was
كان
an
من
answer as our
تغيير
response to the
توسيع
pandemic
التعويضات
for the like the family
الإطار
compensation for the
وأيضا
kids and for
التقرب
the
للنساء
retirement,
في
and
خضم
women
هذا التوسيع
in the midst of all
الحماية
that
وضمان العمل اللائق
managed
لنساء المغرب في مجال القروي
to work
والحقل
and managed to
والتعبدات
work in different areas, villages and towns.
مهم
And
وهنا
here,
الأدوار
the
الإنجابية
positive
للنساء
roles
كان
played by
لها
women,
جواب في توسيع ورش الحماية الاجتماعية
because
لأن المرأة عندما في أكيد في جميع
and
ربوع
women all over the
في
kingdom,
العالم
women
تفكر
think
في فصل
about
الانفصال عن العمل عندما
retirement
يكون
once they
عندها
have
أطفال
children
ولكن
or
اليوم
stop work. But
بالأطفال
today, while you
يمكنك
have children,
وبتوسيع
you
الحماية
still have
الاجتماعية
social
بحقوق
protection and you
المرتبطة
still have all your
بهذا
rights,
الورش يمكن أن
and you
تضمن
can ensure your
حقوقها
rights
وحقوق
when your
أطفالها
children rights.
إذا كانت
There
هناك
have been
أجوبة
answers,
على
in
بذكاء
very intelligent
وبحكمة
answers and
متبصرة
very insightful answers
لقيادة
to
هذه الأزمة
go through
التي
this
تعيشها
crisis that we
العالم
still live till today.
والتي فيها
And
أجوبة
there are
لمجموعة
answers for our
مشاكل
social issues and cultural
والثقافة
issues that is
المرأة في
pertaining to
الأساس
women
وتهم
and pertaining
الأسرة
to
في الأساس
family. And
والمرأة هي
women is a
الأهم
part of the society.
وعندنا أهم
The
التشريعات
importance
على
of
قضايا
working on the
المرأة
issues of women and the
مساواة بقضايا
and
المجتمع
also the
لأن
equality, because
عندما نحتج عن رفع
alleviate and
رفع
uproot
الحيف عن
the
النساء
discriminations
نرفع التمييز والحيف عن
and
المجتمع
uproot the
برفعه
injustice,
يمكن
we
أن أقول
alleviate
أيضا
the pain from all
كان
society.
هناك صندوق
And there is
مبادرة
a
كوفيد
fund
الذي
for
مكن النساء
collaboration
في بعض
that
المهن
allowed
في
women in some professions
المهن الصغيرة
to do some small
استمرارها
work to
في العمل
continue living in
كريم كالنساء
like
اللواتي
women
كانن
like
لا يستفدن من التغطية
who didn't have access to the
الداعمة
social
لا يكون
protection.
عندهن لا كارت
They
غاميق
didn't
التي
have,
تحدثت عنها لكن
but those
ربما كان
women
من
managed to
الاستفادة
utilize
من
for the
التخفيض
compensation
لفترة
during the
الضيقة
compensation.
وكانت هذه
And that was the start
الاشتغال
of
بتوسيع ورش
expanding
الحماية
the social protection.
ونحن
And
اليوم
today,
في خضم
in
هذا
the midst of
الورش
this workshop,
والنساء
women at the heart
صلب
of those
الأزمة
crises
كنا
have been
دائما
always
وحتى اليوم العالمي
struggling with the
للهشاشة
weakness,
وهن
and
الأوائل
they
اللواتي
were
يعانين
the
من
first one
الأزمات
to face
وكانت هناك
crisis. So there have been answers
أجوبة من طرف
from the
المجتمع
civil
المدني
society
لتضامن
for
وجهود
collaboration and consolidation and
وطنية
to respond
للاستجابة
to the
لاحتياجات النساء
concerns of the
الأكثر
children and
احتياجا في
family,
هذه الفترة
and as well
وأيضا
as
من طرف
from the government
الحكومة
and
والقطاعات الوزارية
and
وحتى
also from
الجهوية لحرص على
security
رعاية النساء
to
والنهوض
protect women
بوظائفهن
and
والنساء
women
كمواطنات
as citizens
في
in their
أثر
family and their society.
المجتمع
They
بأدوارهن كنساء
they are a
قادات
pioneer. They are very pioneer. They
تقلدن
played
القيادة
they played a very
واستجبنا
leadership
للقيم
roles.
إذا اليوم
Today,
نعيش صراحة الفتاة المغربية
Moroccan
والمرأة
women
المغربية تحولات
witnessing
اجتماعية وديمغرافية
social transformation
في ظل
in the midst of this pandemic.
وصراحة كانت
Our
نضالات الحركة
struggle
النسائية شيئا ما
has always our struggle has always been preemptive. We always looked at the integration of equality and integration of women in the political society. So the general policies taking into consideration the taking off the discrimination, we think about it, those laws, despite our differences, despite our political differences, despite our women remain out of the picture, out of the disputes, and women are a priority because it raises our kids. Women raises our kids. Today, we have new challenges. We face the challenges of generations. There is a challenge in our generations, and there is a change in the way we perceive the issue of advocacy and equality, and we need to review the laws and legislations. And the challenge of integration. We work as a society in theater and movies, and we believe the importance of having different point of views to empower the change. Certainly there are issues, but when we talk about the importance of talking about changing the mindset, we should come to consensus about this. And the integration is our bet to integrate the new generation now, to own the advocacy and to be agent for change. والمساواة والمناصفة من بين الأهداف التي نشتغل عليها. هناك التحدي الثالث هو تحدي الجهوية. نحن نشتغل كثيرا على تحدي الجهوية بحكم أن we are working so much given that we are working on many with all women across Morocco in an equal way in order to elevate discrimination and to really raise up their case and cause. And we're so happy that we have with us the chairman of the National Council for Human Rights in Morocco that is sharing our session. This means that there is group intelligence and work. We're all working together as fighters for rights. Thank you so much, Ms. Amayma Ashur, for your intervention that is rich with this input and new ideas when it comes to women issues, particularly during COVID. Mrs. Al-Famani, I will start with you. She switched to French.
In your opinion, what is the age of a woman in Morocco, knowing that any situation of improvement of Moroccan of women necessitate their involvement in economic level? Already in Islam, at the time of the Prophet and the Caliphate, women played a very important role. However, since the childhood, Moroccan girls are brought up to become like housemaid, and whether it's at home, on TV, in the street, the image of the woman is attached to her role at home so that she can take care of the household and the education of children. However, Moroccan women imposed themselves through discipline and hard work. They are omnipresent in different sectors, whether it's health, education, communication, agriculture, etc. If the rural population represents 40% of the total population of Morocco, with 13 million inhabitants, a big part of the population represent working women. Uh, Among the 40,000 association of agriculture and jobs, a big part of them was built by women. Morocco was the first country to have women in the judicial apparatus. And since 2018, the job of marriage officer was open to Moroccan women, and also the women have been included in judicial law. And for the jobs of judges, assistant of justice, marriage officer, and others. Also, authority officers, they have high quota to be, and for officer of police and other positions. And also decision-making position, different ministries, we have high numbers of women, even as ministers, secretaries, general inspectors, or ambassadors. At the level of the National Education Ministry, among 63,000 employees, 60,000 are women. We have teachers who are among the staff, and teachers at the regional or national level. Moroccan women have a high percentage of diploma in engineering, and 40%, while country for OCDE, it's only 10%. I think that for Japan it's 10%. In the economic field, the position of responsibility have been open to Moroccan women a long time ago. And also in the formal and informal sectors, we have seen Moroccan women who have been involved in entrepreneurial jobs and also in official positions, and they represent in Morocco in conferences at the national, international level. Professional association and federation are often chaired by a woman. We are witnessing a big improvement for women, and active presence of women in political and economic and cultural and social arena is a vital element to promote economic of the women and peace. All these women who are working are leverage of development and for change in the world.
est devenu un objectif réalisable.
Merci
Thank
Madame
you so
Othmani.
much, Madam
إذن
Asmani.
أعود إليك السيدة رئيسة
Please allow me to go back to you as head of the independent institutional entity focusing on the women's rights. Perhaps you can give me an idea on the council strategy in this regard. Firstly, I would like to say that the Council does have a 2019 strategy that is related to a tri-dimensional proximity, prevention, protection, and support. So this nexus is a triangular nexus, which is once again prevention, protection, and development. This strategy nowadays, I can say that today over and above this nexus, i.e. prevention, protection, and development. Why prevention? Because we have to be preemptive. We have to prevent violation and discrimination before it happens. How can we be preemptive and take precautions beforehand on the level of individuals, on the community level, and the government and the parliament? And that is why we intervene or interact with the several institutions, elected institutions, executive institutions, over and above non-governmental sector. Not to mention, sometimes we work based on very specific individualized cases that will give us a leeway towards continuous framework. For example, the equity advocacy we worked for, or rather we progressed when it comes to women's presence in the public arena. We progressed when it came to the responsibilities of women, as Ms. Uthmani said, deriving at an advanced stage, which is as follows. In the following 5-year elections, hopefully we're going to have 50-50 representation in the Moroccan parliament in 5 years from now. And that is why we're working on this strategy, so that we can sense what is happening, listen to the people, and consider it wins in order to go forward. All of those wins are important, but there are so many unsolved problems nonetheless. For example, we still have a dilemma when it comes to some of the preemptive ideas pertaining to responsible women or women in responsible positions. Sometimes somebody would come and challenge a woman in a certain position, and that is why we still have to work on realizing this. We also have early marriage. Even though we have a clear Article 19 in Family Code that prohibits this type of early marriage, but nonetheless it is happening. Old men are marrying young girls, and young girls' rights are violated. So it's more like a community law, and that is why we need to work in this regard. Ms. Umayma said there is an ongoing strong discussion nowadays to review a number of legal provisions in the family code. Sadly, it is considered the main reference of discrimination, and that is why the family code has to be worked on, aided by quota, helping women reach positions. And on the political arena, we started to see women in elections. They have good contributions. They truly adopted their political and elected responsibilities, whether on the level of the parliament or the governorate councils or others. This means that there are cultural changes in that direction. We were very clear when we presented our recommendations to the head of the government last month. We said that this public policy and governmental programs have to be based on proximity and anti-discriminatory approach. Sorry. And remember, there are PWDs, persons with disabilities, there are refugees, vulnerable groups, all of which we have to really focus on. We are a little far behind. But nonetheless, we have to create equity among all segments of the community, and at the end of the day, equity and equality. Perhaps now we can listen to final messages. Thank you. To be honest with you, it was a very exciting discussion. Today we are in 2021. We still have 9 years to reach 2030, and that is why we need to realize SDGs, which includes women and equality, which is goal number 5. And in order to end discrimination, widen social protection, there are so many issues that are important to women and the socio-economic directions, inclusive empowering women, and whatever I can. And finally, what I can say is that there is a very strong political will and a lot of policy change amidst developmental programs that are incorporating women and streamlining equity and equality as presented by Her Excellency the Chairman. There is a sharp community dialogue, some agreements, some disagreements, but at the end of the day, women remain at the forefront when it comes to important discussions like abortion, inheritance, single women, custody. There are so many articles within the codes and penal codes, which is a dialogue at hand between people that are fighting for rights and politicians. Not to mention, we also have advisors that are supporting us in order to realize women's rights. Not to mention other consultative councils that are going to see the light, like perhaps the Anti-Discriminatory Council that might be realized this year. Not to mention that this supported the civil society based on participation, rendering a petition to change a law or think about creating a new law, all of which are new methodologies given to us by the 2021 Constitution. And therefore, we're working on this in order to derive and realize our goals. Today, we're working as a group and as a movement. As the chairman said, everybody's work in his or her position is able to change the reality of women. Maybe we can now talk to Mrs. Althmani. She switched
Mani,
to
the
French.
floor is yours. So what I could say is we have in our country great women. We have activists that's investing themselves. We have people, or we have women that are very courageous. We have a great country and we have beautiful and wonderful women. And that's my conclusion.
It delights me at the end of this outstanding meeting that tackled rights of women, past and past to future, to reiterate 5 important issues that were given today. Number 1, the importance of a women's role in community based on humanitarian realities. No one community can have less rights of one the other, rendering a logical demand for equality, which is the norm and not the exception. The important role of CSOs in human rights along the national rights to enhance legal rights and freedoms. The importance of the CSOs in pushing forth to raise the rights, whether through assessment and raising awareness, the importance of the public seniority in order to serve the stability of its community, the importance of international coordination based on sharing experiences and lessons learned based on optimal practices. Today's intervention shed the light on Morocco's focus on gender equity and equality, focusing on empowering women based on political will and democratic transformation, supporting women movements that integrates with the National Council of Human Rights, whether in its forum situation or new constitutionally supported situation. Not to mention the National Council had a very important independent work in this regard, focusing on a Paris Declaration so that it is protecting human rights, registering violations, enabling legal rights. Not to mention, it really participated in elevating community awareness and new laws through open public dialogue on human rights, inclusive women rights and legal rights, in order to elevate the culture of human rights that infiltrates education and community, rendering it a community culture, or through consultative role, giving memorandums and reports pertaining to legal stipulations and public policies. Nonetheless, what has been achieved is not sufficient, nor the ideal and optimal aspiration. When it comes to legals, it's not a fixed issue. It is changing pertaining to the development of countries, each on its own, and across the international arena. The more development and prosperity, the more they look to higher levels of freedoms and rights, which is giving us a vision covering challenges and opportunities. There are opportunities and challenges calling for more work and aspiration of a future where everybody enjoys freedoms and rights void of discrimination. And the shortest way to overcome challenges based on integration, tolerance, and accepting the other. Before I close this outstanding women discussion, I can only thank every single participant that made this a success, patroned by UAE and the magical Dubai. Thank you so much. May you have a better future, a future where the plural of women, as it is pronounced in Arabic, prevails towards a developmental dynamic serving communities. Peace be upon you. God bless you, and I leave you in God's blessings.